data frames, merging them. That's just a little sneak preview. We'll walk you through a handful of examples, and then towards the end, there might be some questions I'll give you guys, and we'll spend a little bit of time like letting you loose and trying to tackle those on your own. So without further ado, let's dive into it today.
Okay, so this time, all right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. I know last time we had everyone download the data and re-upload it, but this time we're going to do something different. I'm going to show you guys how to use Kaggle's API in order to get the data. So start by clicking on File and then click Save a Copy in Drive, and then that's what you guys will be coding on.
And you're gonna go off the thumbs up kind of, you've done that, all right? So I can get a visual cue so we can move on and get you guys out of here quick.
Yeah.
All righty, everybody good?
Okay,
good.
cool.
Nice.
So once you do that, we'll go ahead and run the first code chunk. Essentially, pip install is installing the Opendatasets library, and that is what we're going to use to download the data off Kaggle. So run this. Check mark once it's run.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
This is a different way of getting the data set into your environment without having to download it here. It's easier, I guess, if you want. This is a good point. If you want to kind of like demo your data science work, like say for an interview or something like that, using this this library is a better way of kind of making sure whoever's on the other end of your interview or call can also access that Kaggle data set.
So go ahead and run the next code chunk. And as you see, it's going to ask you what your Kaggle username is. So now what you need to do is go to your Kaggle account. So click on the link to go to kaggle.com. And if you're already signed in, then you should come to this page. But if not, follow the directions I wrote here and create an account. But I'm going to go ahead and show you guys what to do next. So click on the top right-hand circle and click account. And so once you're there, you'll be able to see your username and you'll be able to create an API token. Does that make sense? Anyone confused? Yeah, that's the point. So go to you can click create API token, and as you see, it downloaded a file, and you'll just open that. And then okay, let me move this out of the way. But essentially, right here is the key. Where do I? Okay, yeah, see here, you all will have a different key, but this is how you would get it. Okay, cool. All right, so essentially what that did is, unlike last time, now the data has directly been downloaded to our environment. And now we can just create our data frame and start working on the data. So go ahead and run the next code chunk. Right, so now DF is our data frame. This is our data. It's the New York City Airbnb open data. This just gives information on the different Airbnbs in New York City. So what we're going to go over first is how to fill in NAs, right? So essentially what an NA is, it denotes when there's a missing value or no data in that place, it will fill in with an NA instead. So I'll show you in the reviews per month column, there are a lot of NAs because there's no reviews, right? So one thing we can do to sort of clean this up is we can replace these NAs with a 0, right? So the code to do that would be here. So run it and you'll see that it fills up.
Alrighty, so you just filled the NAs, is that correct? All right, so say there's a separate data frame, right? You're planning a vacation to the East Coast, and you know that in Brooklyn there's a 5% chance of rain, Manhattan there's a 90% chance of rain, and so on, right? In the East Coast area. So I put that into a dictionary right here. You have the neighborhood groups, and these are all the values, and then their associated chance of rain values, right? You go ahead and run this code right here, and now you have a data frame with the neighborhood groups and the chance of rain. Now I want to bring this data into our main data frame. So now we have a little bit more information in our main data frame. So I want another column going across the side here that's going to have the percentage chance of rain for the specific Airbnb listings. So what I'm going to do is do a full outer join here. There's a handful of different joins you can do in Pandas when merging two data frames. If you open up the Stacked Overflow link, there's a really good visualizations for you to understand how this works. You'll kind of go over this in like CS 166. It's just showing you how the left data frame, this would be like our main one, and then the right one would be the weather data we're bringing in, right? So when you're doing a merging, you're merging on one column. So that column would be the neighborhood groups we have over here, right? So you notice we have data on Brooklyn, chance of rain and stuff like that. So there's a column here called neighborhood group. We're going to be doing a merge, and then that's how it's able to identify, okay, these values also have this weather data. So as you notice, maybe there's some neighborhood groups that we don't have weather data information on that, right? So if you do an inner join, I think some of them will be deleted, right? Because there's not a match in the right-hand side. When you do a left join, the green right here is just like replacing the missing values with null values, as you see in the data frame. But the outer join right here is the safest option. If the value is missing, it's just going to fill it in as like null or nan, right? So we're going to do an outer join here. You had run this code, so the next step right here would be to run this. We're going to rename the column in our weather data frame. Right here, it's spelled neighborhood group, capital N, and over here in our main data frame, it's called neighborhood group, but lowercase, and there's an underscore. So I want to make sure that they have the same name, so Pandas knows which column to do a merge on, right? So that's what the first code will do. The second code, when you go ahead and run this, your first parameter you're passing in is the weather data frame, and then you're going to be merging on this column. So that's what the on parameter specifies. This is the column you do the merge on, and then the last parameter is what kind of join. As I showed you in Stacked Overflow, there's a handful of different merge methods. So we're choosing the outer one. So when you run that, all of a sudden you can now see we have the associated weather forecast for the neighborhood group. So now our data set is able to tell which listings will get rained on, right? This is kind of useful when you are doing some analysis, when you're trying to find correlation and stuff. You may have two different data streams. You want to figure out a way of merging them so you can get more information out of your data. A lot of the times, the tricky part is like figuring out which is the best method for merging. I think that's a little bit outside of the scope of today's workshop, but I gave you some references you can look into if you're interested. So I'm going to give you an example problem right here. So say we all work for Airbnb, and we were noticing like a lot of the listings, people aren't interested in getting listings when it's raining, right? So what we can do to combat this is to offer a rainy day flash sale. So this promotional sale, we're planning on maybe giving the price minus you're minusing the price by the percent chance of rain divided by 2. So I did the math here, and this is what it's supposed to look like. So this is kind of like the end price for the first example I put on here for you guys. So I want you to go ahead and run this code. And this kind of shows you how you can do operations on columns. It's really helpful for if you have like, if you want to perform like mathematical operations on columns, this is really useful. So you're able to do that rather like a SQL statement, which can kind of be like really repetitive and long. So when you run that, does it make sense? You're taking the percent chance of rain, dividing it by 100 because you want the percentage like in a decimal, and then you divide that by 2. So like say the rain was 50% chance of rain, you're dividing that by 2. So now you have 25% chance of rain. I want to multiply it by the price and then minus it, the main price. So that's kind of how you get your discounted price, right? That's just an example. The next one, here, what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through how to use toDateTime, that function in Pandas. That one's really useful for so like I know Brooklyn's going to rain like 75. What was the value? Sorry. Brooklyn has a 5% chance of rain. I know this. This is a separate data frame. I want to merge it to all the rows that like, say it's like 100,000 rows, right? Instead of manually doing that, you can do a merge, and then now you have a lot more information. Yeah. So I would be the neighborhood group is kind of like the key identifier for that thing. So if it was another example is that if you have data on like sports players, maybe you have like a unique identifier. So that might be just some value, right? And that's how you would identify them, and that's the column you specify for performing a merge. This one I use neighborhood group because that's easily there's only one Brooklyn, right? But there might be some issues if you have multiple Brooklyn. But that's a question like you'd have to figure out a way of like no worries. Everybody else good? Good. Able to follow along. Make a little bit of sense. Does the rainy day flash sale code make any sense? Let me comment this out and run it and show you what the round function does. When you first do this, right, you perform this, it automatically converts the value to a float, right? So using the round 2 option, because we're working with money, you go ahead and run it with the round option, you see it converts it to its appropriate like value. So that was just an example. So moving on, I want to talk about the to date time function. That's really helpful for traversing through dates. A lot of the times, most data being collected, it has a timestamp on it. So if you want to know like a specific time frame, I want to get information out of it, it's really helpful to know this function. You run this code on the specific column. That's one of the parameters you're passing in. You can specify the type of format here. If you open up this Stack Overflow link, there's some good explanations for it. If you guys are familiar with regex and regex, you can specify the type of format for the date, because like the way they write out dates in like Asia is different than the way they write out dates in America. So like this is where you want to have stick with a similar format. Using infer date time format is a simple way of just like being lazy and telling pandas to just figure it out by itself, right? So you include that in the in your code, run it, and now we have converted last review. Last review before this, it was an object, meaning it was a string. So all of the dates, they were looked at as strings. I'll tell you, I once had to work with some bank data, and I didn't really know too much about pandas, right? So I manually like wrote a for loop to check each char value, and that's just so like not helpful. So this really saves your time. I'm telling you, like you'll be surprised once you like start working how many people still do like stuff through Excel, and this really puts you like an edge over like a lot of other candidates, because I know like you need that extra edge. This is what you need to put on your resume, like pandas, knowing this. So right here, we want to know what pricing was like at the start of the pandemic. This is a lot of times like a lot of businesses are kind of like, this is such an edge case. They're kind of curious how their business gets affected by like big events in the world, like the pandemic, right? So you can use the .dt accessor function. After doing the to date time, we're able to use this accessor to access the year. So now we can just say, hey, I want all the rows that are greater than 2019, greater than or equal to 2019. And you're able to notice here, you have all the rows, all the reviews that were given after 2019. Yeah. So this is just another way of chopping your data up. That's really helpful by date. So what was the mean price for the first month of the pandemic? I want you guys to just take like 2 or 3 minutes. Actually, I'll give you 5 minutes to try and figure out how to find the mean price for the first month of the pandemic. So first month of the pandemic, we're just assuming that's 2019. So I want you to write some code to figure out what the mean value is. And feel free to use Stack Overflow, whatever you need online, right? I'm not trying to tie your hands, you know, like a lot of the times when you're doing these data projects, bro, somebody has already done this before online. So hell, you can even ask ChatGPT to figure out how to write that. So let me know if you need any help. I can kind of get your gears going. All right, we're going to move on to Groupby and Crosstab. I'll be going around if anybody needs help.
Okay. So Groupby and Crosstab are some very useful functions. So Groupby specifically will allow you to collect like identical data into groups. and then you can gain information on it, like the mean or the count. So I'm gonna start by showing you guys group by, and then you'll understand what I mean by the aggregation functions. So the first example I have is with the neighborhood group column. Essentially, this is grouping all of the data by the neighborhood group, which has 5 values, right? Each neighborhood in Brooklyn. And so since I took the mean of that, I'm getting the mean of all the numerical values. So for example, this is the average number of nights someone stays in the Bronx, average number of nights someone stays in Brooklyn, so on. Like average reviews per month, everything like that. One thing I want to point out is that you can't just group by and not put a function. Nothing outputs, right? There is no visualization for this. You won't see anything. So you need to put something, whether it's like dot sum, dot mean, or any of the values that we went up, any of the functions that we went over in the last workshop. For now, I'll just keep this at mean. Okay. But group by is typically not used for grouping by one column. It's typically used for grouping two or more. So for example, if we were to group neighborhood group and room type together, really quick before I do that, I do just want to go over what room type is. Room type has 3 values, right? Private room, apartment, and shared room. And then we know that a neighborhood group has 5 values. Has 5 values, right? Each neighborhood. So what we're doing by this function is we're going to find out how many of each, like how many private rooms are in Brooklyn, or how many apartments are in Brooklyn, and so on for each neighborhood. So when we group it and we use dot count, we'll get the number of each. Does that make sense?
Can you redo that? Sorry.
Redo it.
Just the explanation of the grouping.
Okay, so what this line does is it groups neighborhood group and room type together, and dot count will take the amount of each type. So for example, as you can see here, each neighborhood is divided into each room type, right? And then we're given a number for the count of each. So let's say you wanted to know how many apartment Airbnbs are in Manhattan, you would just go down and you can see here. There's 13,199. Okay. However, we can see from this is very messy looking, right? It has all of the other columns which have nothing to do with this, and it's putting the count there. So typically when you're using group by, what happens is the 2 attributes you're grouping by are put in the parentheses. And then this third attribute, think of this as correlating to the aggregation function, right? What is going to show up is the count of neighborhood group, or in this line, the count of room type. Here, I'll show you. Does that make sense?
She's performing a group by, right? So now Bronx, you look at all the Bronx values, right? Without it, there'd be multiple rows. So you're combining all of the Bronx values together. So that's what the first thing is doing. And then you're also doing the same on room type. If you were to just have neighborhood group and group by, then you're just performing that on just the neighborhood group. But now you're doing both, like you're doing 2 group bys. So now there's like 2 values kind of getting, like if they're similar in that column, combine them, right? So imagine like you're playing video games on an arcade, right? And you have your own username or whatever. You're doing group by your username. It'll look at all of your player entries, right? Like your scores and stuff, and it'll just combine them all together. So that's kind of what this is doing with Bronx, and then the room type.
How do you think it's
Bronx?
it's like, for example,
Like these three, like this is all information on the Bronx. And this is dividing the Bronx into the 3 room types.
okay,
So it's basically kind of like you're performing a summary by doing these group bys.
yeah.
You don't look at, you're not like splitting it up into multiple rows. You're just combining all the ones that have that similar attribute.
It can be kind of hard to visualize it with it looking like this. So one thing I recommend is you can use the .unstack function, and what it'll do is it'll make it kind of a nice looking data frame. So like visually it looks better and makes more sense. Oh, this is not referencing the ID. This is the same thing. Okay, so what this is doing, because there's, you know how in the other line of code, there's this sort of bracket thing, right? And that's missing from here. So because that's missing, it's taking the count on every single column. So it'll be here, it'll be saying like, how many rows are there that have like the Bronx and apartment? And then it's making that value for every column.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
but when you add this, it's counting it for only the neighborhood group, which is why it's only
The count
showing
is only
one.
being performed on the neighborhood group.
Yeah. So essentially it's just showing up. But yeah.
So before it was doing count on all of the columns, the ones we weren't really looking at. Here, we're just looking at that one specific column at the end. So a lot of the times when you have a data frame, right? And you just want specific column values, columns, you add that second bracket at the end of it, and it'll like narrow it down to just those columns.
Okay. So let's say you want to do group by with 3 columns. This is how you would do it, right? So for example, if you wanted to find the average price based on both neighborhood and type of room, what you would do is, since you're looking for price, that's going to be on your outermost, because the data that's going to show up is the average price. And then you're going to group it by the neighborhood group and the room type. So what you're going to be left with is the average price of the Airbnbs in each neighborhood by apartment. I mean, by room type. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Moving on. I'm just gonna briefly show you guys another function, because this function is very similar to group by, but it makes it really easy to do visualizations. So it's called Crosstab. And it can, so for example, if you crosstab neighborhood and room type, you get this data frame, right? The count of the room type by neighborhood group, which if you remember, we did do that previously up here. But the neat thing about crosstab is that you can apply plot bar to it, and then you'll get a visualization showing you the counts on a bar graph. I do want to be clear that you can make this graph on group by. I'll show you, but it doesn't quite look the same here. Do you see how that works? Whereas this one is grouping it nicely. So we have one more problem left for you guys, and that is to group the data by year and neighborhood and find the mean availability throughout the year. And one thing I want to say is that we converted to date time on the Airbnb with rain data frame. So don't use DS, use that one.
The previous one.
The
at
previous
the
one.
top That you set the to date time function. Yeah.
Why does Dubai use count and for the count development?
Crosstab is automatically doing count by itself. It's like its default.
So the first value is we want to group by the year, right? So you would look at the last review. That's the column that has the year stuff. If you remember, we did the to date time earlier and set it equal to that. So that dot dt dot year, that's what we're grouping by. The second thing we're going to be doing is grouping by the neighborhood group. So Airbnb underscore df underscore with rain, and then it's neighbor. And spelling is very important because it won't know which column to go to if you don't have that. So those are the two. I think what it is you might need to put these, because it's a multiple items. I think you might need to put it in sorry. I think you might need to put these square brackets since it's two columns. Oops, sorry. Yep. And then the last thing is we want the availability throughout the year. Forget what that column is called. Availability underscore 365. And then from that, I want the mean. And then I run this, let's see. Okay. Another thing right now, it's returning it as a series. If you put this in another bracket again, it'll pretty it up for you. So this is what I was looking for. Okay. This is another way of making it look pretty. There you go. Oh, that's helpful. Another thing, I think you might notice that like these values are really high. You need to you can just change the type as type int. You run that. Now your values are rounded. So as type is also really helpful. I think that was all. So if you need help understanding that explanation of understanding that last little code block, I can stay after and help you guys out. If not, thank you guys for coming out to our second Pandas workshop. I hope you're able to get really good exposure to this. I really wish these events were kind of thrown my first and second year. I would have been way on top of my things. So thank you to David for putting on this data science workshop. Also, thank you to Surabhi for putting in some work on this. Thank you guys.